Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Project Tiger, 50 Years of Conservation, presented by Nat Hab Expedition Leader Aditya Panda. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for being here today. Over to you, Aditya.
Thank you, Rob. Hello, everyone. How have you all been? It's been a long time since I last presented, and the reason behind that, as you might guess, is that I have practically been on field back to back leading amazing Nat Hab expeditions. Since I've last seen you all here on Daily Dose of Nature, I've been on at least one Grand India Wildlife Adventure and one India Tiger Quest, and we've had some phenomenal sightings. I hope a lot of you have been busy on natural habitat adventures, and I'm really looking forward to discussing today's topic today. For those of you who are tuning into one of my webinars for the first time, my name is Aditya Panda, and I've been leading Nat Hab's India expeditions since 2016. I primarily lead Nat Hab's tiger expeditions in India, which include the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, India Tiger Quest, and India Tiger Safari, which is a photo pro expedition. Today's topic is a celebration as much as it is a discussion on India's conservation history, and it is equally a statement for the future of tigers in the world and in this country. In 2023, which is this year, India completes 50 years of dedicated and focused tiger conservation efforts. And that is the topic of today's webinar. Of course, it hadn't always been so. Tiger conservation was not practiced the way it is practiced today, or has been practiced for the past 50 years all the time. For centuries, tigers had been hunted. Every hunter, every trophy hunter wanted the tiger in his collection, and it was the ultimate prize for any sport hunter. And since as far back as one can record history, tigers have been revered and feared and hunted all through. Earlier, of course, it was usually a sport of kings and noblemen and the rich and well-to-do to go tiger hunting. And this continued until fairly recently in our history. Of course, in the past, the population of human beings was so limited, and the expanse of forests and wilderness so seemingly unlimited, that hunting tigers never seemed to have any effect. In fact, some 19th century British chroniclers write that at that time in India, it was a question of whether man or tiger would prevail. But with the advent of modern firearms, with automatic rifles and spotting scopes and four-wheel drive vehicles, all of that changed. Tigers were being hunted by everybody and anybody, and they were being wiped out from across India. At the same time, human population was also expanding, especially through the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And that meant that a lot more land was going under agriculture, mines, urbanization, and so on and so forth. And all of this land came by destroying tiger forests. All of this became, quite unsustainable after the period immediately after World War II. You see, it is said, estimated, guesstimated, whatever you call it, that at the turn of the 20th century, there were about 40,000 tigers in all of India. Now, this sport of tiger hunting became a commercial sport, a very commercial sport in the period immediately after World War II. After World War II, World War II ended in 1945, and India became independent from colonial rule in 1947. And the world was entering a period of peace and prosperity. People suddenly had time, money, and the means to travel from America, from Europe, into Africa and India on safari, on hunting expeditions that had been organized very professionally and were being guided by experienced hunters. So in many ways, it was like going on a trip like you would with Nat Hab, except that you got the tiger home with you, which was sad, but that's how it was. And at that point of time, India, after 250 years of colonialism, India had been impoverished tremendously. And in 1947, when India got independent, there were many efforts put in to rapidly increase the nation's economic situation. And one of the ways in which to do this was to get in as much foreign exchange as possible. And one of the ways to do that was to sell tiger hunting tours. And believe it or not, this here is actually a Government of India tourist office advertisement from the 1960s. All of that began to alarm conservationists and even a lot of hunters and former hunters by the 1960s. At that point of time, we had a lady who was our Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and she has famously described herself as a naturalist had she not been a politician. These former hunters and conservationists began to petition Mrs. Gandhi on the terrifying situation of the tiger in the country in the 1960s, and they pressed her to do something about it. And in 1968, her government banned tiger hunting and the export of tiger skins from India. In 1970, it was found important to take stock of the situation of wild tigers in India, and the first all India tiger census was conducted. Back in the day, there wasn't very sophisticated science available to carry out wild animal censuses or population estimates the way we can do them today. So what they did was a method was devised where tiger tracks were traced. They were found and traced, and the left hind track of every set of tiger tracks found was traced on a sheet of glass, or using plaster of Paris, a cast was made. And these were then compared with the notion that individual tigers had individual unique shapes of tracks. And using this methodology, it was concluded that India had less than 1,800 tigers surviving in 1970. In 1972, her government passed what was called the Wildlife Protection Act, which continues to be the foundation of India's conservation policies today. And the Wildlife Protection Act outlawed all hunting and called for the establishment of a large number of wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. When I say wildlife sanctuary, in India, that refers to what you would call a state park in the US. I know that in the US, wildlife sanctuary refers to a captive facility where rescued wild animals are looked after. Wildlife sanctuary in India is the equivalent of a state park in the US. In 1973, her government started what was then called the world's most ambitious species conservation program, which is Project Tiger. Now, it is interesting how Project Tiger was named. Mrs. Gandhi's government set up a task force, including experts who had been petitioning her to do something about protecting tigers in India. And she asked them to sit together, put their minds together, and come up with a report on what was needed to do, what was needed to be done. And this was in 1972. And since the task force, after they compiled the report, they have to come up with a name, a title for the report, and they called it Project Tiger. And that name stuck on. Project Tiger was a tiger-focused species and landscape conservation program that was launched on the 1st of April 1973, exactly 50 years ago. And this is that landmark moment when Project Tiger was being launched in Corbett National Park, which along with 8 other national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, became one of India's first 9 tiger reserves. Of course, back then, India was still economically extremely impoverished, and a nation that was working hard to pull its masses out of poverty and to become self-sufficient in things as basic as food grain production. For a nation like that, at that point of time, it was not possible to fund an ambitious species conservation program like this. So the World Wildlife Fund stepped in there. World Wildlife Fund was established in 1961, and fairly quickly they set up their office in India in 1969. And WWF was in many ways the Kickstarter that Project Tiger required. Until then, India's forests had been managed primarily for timber. India had a forest department that was over 200 years old, but this was really a forestry department. They were more into silviculture than anything else. Just because wildlife happened to live in forests, most wildlife happened to live in forests, especially tigers, the management of wildlife was in charge of the forest department. But the forest department was lacking in many ways in terms of skills and resources for proper wildlife management. So when Project Tiger was being planned, WWF pledged $1 million to, take it off the ground, and it also helped with crucial things like jeeps and other equipment for getting a project like this functioning, and more importantly, in the training and capacity building of field staff of the forest department to turn them into professional wildlife managers. Here you can see a Willys Jeep with the WWF logo on it that was being handed over to one of the first 9 tiger reserves with which Project Tiger started. Project Tiger began by choosing 9 different habitats in 9 different kinds of landscapes across the length and breadth of India. Here you see 8 that are listed because these were the original 8 that were proposed, and then Mrs. Gandhi added the Sundarbans Delta, which is the world's only mangrove forest, tidal forest where tigers live. It's the largest mangrove forest in the world in the delta of the Ganges and the Brahmaputra rivers, and it is a very unique habitat where the ocean swallows half the landscape under tides twice a day, and tigers live in that kind of habitat, believe it or not. But anyhow, I digress. Project Tiger started with 9 different areas that were chosen as tiger reserves, which were meant for the focused conservation of tigers and their landscape. And this played a huge role in halting that march towards extinction that the tigers were on by the 1960s. Had it not been for Project Tiger, then there is no question that by the 1980s, maybe the 1990s, the tiger would have been extinct in the wild in India, like it has become across large parts of its former range across Asia, including Iran, including many parts of Southeast Asia, etc. Project Tiger, the concept of Project Tiger was what is known as the source and sink model. The project aimed to identify very promising areas within larger tiger landscapes, which you can see here circled in different colors depending on what landscapes they're in. And these areas were meant to be managed intensively as tiger source sites. When I say source sites, I mean an area where you have a large, stable, and breeding population of tigers, which serves as a source of tigers for the larger landscape around it. And this larger landscape around it is called the sink, the landscape into which tigers overflowing from these source sites will sink into. Very simple concept, very effective concept. And of course, in doing so, not only did Project Tiger save these individual landscapes, these 9 landscapes, which have now grown to 53 and counting, but it also ended up saving a lot of other species that were going downhill. Many species, including iconic species like the Asian elephant, ignored carnivores like the Indian or Asiatic wild dog, hornbills, hill myna, all kinds of species which were getting lost due to the decimation of habitat and uncontrolled hunting. All of these species began to recover in these sites that were identified as tiger reserves. So, in effect, it proved the whole concept of having an umbrella species, a species which, if protected, leads to the protection of the entire landscape that it occupies. And such umbrella species, or you can call them apex species or keystone species, are invariably always the top carnivore of any landscape. You cannot protect the entire landscape without protecting the top carnivore in that, and you certainly cannot protect the top carnivore without protecting the landscape, the grasslands, the forests, the streams, the herbivores that feed on these, and all the other creatures that make up the a functioning, thriving ecosystem. Today, there are over 3,000 tigers surviving in India, and as you can look on this map, all the red areas indicate tiger presence. All the light blue areas indicate potential tiger habitats. The largest distribution of tigers, as you can see, is in the central part of the country. The second largest would be here in the foothills of the Himalaya in India, and here you don't see some in Nepal, but there are tigers here as well. There's a large population in southern India, and scattered smaller populations in the northeast part of the country. Besides, there are other transient or smaller populations in eastern central India and strewn across various parts of the country. And this here is the Sundarbans mangrove ecosystem that I was just talking about. You see the part here that is in India. Just across the border here, there is a slightly larger part in Bangladesh, and there too tigers exist. So this is the latest data as recent as 2022 showing tiger presence across India. So let me go back to this previous slide. Here we have the results of the All India Tiger Estimation exercise from last year, which was 2022, and it estimates the minimum number of adult tigers, which for the purposes of population estimation are considered tigers over the age of a year and higher. So according to the latest data that we have, there are at least 3,167 tigers excluding cubs in India as of 2022. But how do you count tigers? I mean, they're so difficult to cite. They're such elusive, primarily nocturnal and crepuscular creatures. They're very difficult to cite, and it's virtually impossible to do a head count of tigers. And of course, the tracing method that I talked to you about earlier was found to be not scientific enough and not accurate enough. So you have to find some way of reliably estimating the number of tigers in a country. And the answer lies in the barcode that every tiger carries on its body. Tigers are striped, and each tiger has its own unique stripe pattern. And so if you manage to record the stripe patterns on both flanks of every tiger, you can theoretically tell how many tigers there are in your given area. And this is done through an exercise called camera trapping. Infrared cameras, infrared triggered or remote triggered cameras are placed in areas where tigers are likely to walk on either side of the game trail or path or road, with the intention that they should capture both flanks of the tiger. And this, of course, cannot be done just randomly. It is done through a very rigorous statistical process. You have to have a certain number of camera traps in a certain area to get an accurate picture of the tiger situation there. This is known as camera trap density. How many camera traps you have in, say, every 100 square kilometer grid. Again, if you keep these camera traps out in the field for too long, you will end up capturing a lot of transient tigers, and tigers that might not be resident there, tigers that might be wandering in from other landscapes. And that will give you an overcount. If you keep the camera traps for too short a period, then you will probably not be able to camera trap every tiger in the area, and you will end up with an undercount. So typically these trap cameras are set for a period of between 45 to 60 days in a set trap camera density in the landscape that is being estimated. And then the results are put through a software called Extract Compare, which does this amazing job of identifying individual stripe patterns through 3D modeling and telling you how many tigers you have in your area. But of course, you can do this sort of exercise only in areas where you have large tiger populations, where populations are large enough that your detection probability is high enough for you to actually be able to conduct such an exercise. There are many areas where tigers exist in such low densities that you might place as many camera traps as you want without ever capturing any of the local tigers. So the methodology used in those areas is to look for indirect evidence of tigers, such as tracks, scat. From scat you get DNA, and from DNA you can tell individual animals apart. But what I just explained about how tiger populations are estimated was a very, very simplistic way of explaining it. The actual methodology takes place over 3 different phases and is carried out every 4 years on an all India basis. In phase 1, You have a ground survey to collect preliminary data, evidence of presence or absence of tigers, the other co-predators like wild dogs, leopards, etc., and prey animals. And while you're doing that, you are also estimating the prey density of those areas through what are known as line transit surveys carried out to see and estimate the status of prey animals like deer and wild pigs in the area. All of these are indicators to tiger presence in the area. In phase 2, you do a habitat survey, terrain, forest cover, satellite data, ground data, all of that, ground surveys of flora. And finally, in phase 3, you identify areas that look most promising in phase 1, from the phase 1 and phase 2 results. And those areas are then camera trapped, and that is called phase 3. In the 53 tiger reserves that India currently has, there is also something called phase 4, which is done every year, which is simply a repetition of phase 3 within those tiger reserves every year. So when you visit India on your tiger tours to the Grand India Wildlife Adventure or India Tiger Quest, you will often, while on game drive, come across these trap cameras set by the roadsides. The All India estimation, as I said, is done every 4 years, and the phase 4 exercise is done annually within the tiger reserves. Now, this exercise happens to be the world's largest biodiversity survey. Over 650,000 man days of work, a similar number of kilometers covered on foot every time this survey is done, 641,449 kilometers of foot surveys. The number of tiger photographs captured alone in 2022 was 97,399, and 32,588 track cameras used, and ridiculous statistics. It's an enormous exercise, and that is the reason it is done every 4 years and not on an all India basis every year, because this exercise is so huge that it really takes a lot of manpower that needs to be diverted from other activities like protection and monitoring to be able to conduct this survey. Now, we have been having this methodology being followed since 2006. Until 2004, we used the older tiger track tracing method, which is also called the pug mark method, because pug mark is an anglicized Indian word for tiger tracks. Now, when we first conducted the All India Tiger estimation in 2006, it was found that there were 1,411 tigers left in the country, which was perhaps the lowest ever. Now, Project Tiger hasn't been all rosy. In the 50 years of its existence, there have been ups and downs. And the good thing about it is that every time there has been a down, there have been learnings, and these learnings have led to correction measures, which have again sort of led to course correction and the sustenance of the project and the sustenance of the tiger in India. So in 2006, we had estimated 1,411 tigers in India. 2010, it went up to 1,706. 2014, it was 2,226. And 2018, it was 2,967 tigers. And in 2022, that number has increased marginally by about 200 animals to 3,167. Now, it's important to keep in mind that these are not head counts. These are statistical mean figures that are compared by keeping a standardized estimation method, and that method tells us where we are going, whether the numbers are going up or down or remaining stable. But do keep in mind that it is impossible to get a head count of an animal as elusive as a tiger on an all India level. All of this data is made available to the public every time the exercise is carried out, and the report called Status of Tigers is published on the website of the National Tiger Conservation Authority of India, which you can all look up online, the National Tiger Conservation Authority. Google it and you'll find lots of interesting facts and data on tiger conservation in India. Anyhow, let's analyze the data from the 2022 estimation. A total of 3,080 individual tigers were photo captured, and the largest number of tigers has been found in the central India highlands and eastern Ghats landscape, which is 1,161 tigers, which is almost a third of all the tigers living in India. Now, the Central India tiger landscape, as this landscape is called in short, is the largest tiger landscape and spans 8 states. Our tiger trips, all our tiger trips in India visit this landscape. We do visit the Kanha and Bandhavgarh National Parks on the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, which are at the heart of the Central India tiger landscape. And we also visit the Ranthambore Tiger Reserve in India Tiger Quest and India Tiger Safari Photo Pro Expedition. And the Ranthambore Tiger Reserve is an isolated reserve on the northwestern corner of this landscape. And for those of you who have heard about the cheetahs being reintroduced into India, that is also within this landscape. We also visit Kaziranga National Park and Tiger Reserve in what is known as the Northeastern Hills and Brahmaputra Plains landscape. And that landscape shows a population of 194 tiger. The vast majority of this population, about 140, are in the Kaziranga Tiger Reserve that we visit. Again, these numbers here are not population figures. They are the number of tigers photo captured in these landscapes. And here you have a population comparison from 2006 to 2018 landscape-wise. What we found in the 2022 estimation is that the majority of the 200 or so tigers that have increased since the last All India Tiger estimation in 2018 have been in 2 states in central India. The state of Madhya Pradesh, where Kanha and Bandhavgarh are, and another adjoining state called Maharashtra. And these 2 states have really driven the tiger numbers this time, and a lot of tigers have been detected outside tiger reserves, and a very healthy sign has been seen of tigers repopulating areas where they are naturally repopulating, and areas where they had once vanished from. But do we call Project Tiger a success? In 50 years of its existence, should we be calling it a success? I think personally that success or failure are too black and white. We need to be able to have different grades of success being measured. Yes, it has definitely been highly successful in stemming the imminent extinction of the tiger. Without Project Tiger, definitely the tiger would have been pretty much gone by now. And yes, India has done way more than any other tiger range country in the world, and probably more than than any other country trying to save its large mammals as well. Especially given the fact that India is the world's most populous country and it is an extremely land-starved country. But then I look at this comparison, this map on the left here is from 1972, from the first All India Tiger census. and it shows tiger presence all across the country, right? If you look at this map from 2022, which shows tiger presence in red dots versus this one, which shows it in black dots, you will notice that this area here, right here, has seen tremendous tiger decline. And this area again here in the northeast, areas bordering Bhutan, have seen tremendous tiger decline in these 50 years. So yes, tiger conservation has been successful, Project Tiger has been successful, but that success has been driven by certain individual landscapes and certain states and certain reserves, while it has not been so successful in many other parts. And these parts are traditionally the areas where bushmeat poaching and mining have been chronic problems. If India were to protect all its presently available tiger habitat, all the habitat that still exists in this country, if all of it were protected to the standards to which our tiger reserves are protected, India can potentially have up to 15,000 tigers, if not more. And that is when we would truly consider the tiger safe, and that would probably take it off the endangered species list as well. And to do this, we need to rewild a lot of, not just rewild, I mean, rewild would probably not be the most appropriate term, but to repopulate a lot of reserves and a lot of tiger habitats that have the habitat but do not probably have the prey and do not definitely have their local tiger populations anymore. So the way ahead with these places is to first safeguard the habitat, recover its prey animals, and then after there is sufficient confidence in the management of that area, in the amount of prey available, in the quality of habitat available, then to translocate tigers from reserves that are doing well and resettle them in these areas. And this has been done successfully in quite a few places now. And states like Madhya Pradesh, where Kana and Bandhavgarh are pioneers in this sort of wildlife management, they have started doing this on a regular basis. And before I complete and before I switch over to the Q&A session, I would like to finish with this quote from the ancient Indian epic, nearly 2,500 years old, called the Mahabharata. And the quote translates, the quote is in Sanskrit, and it translates into, "The tiger vanishes without the forest, and the forest vanishes without the tiger. Hence, the tiger protects the forest, and the forest protects the tiger." What an amazing message to the future generations. As far, I mean, I'm just amazed at the wisdom 2,500 years ago. And this is exactly what we are doing with species conservation, landscape conservation, all of it leading to biodiversity conservation, which is the single most effective and important way in which we can fight climate change and a dying planet. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to your questions now.
All right, thank you so much. Now, before we start in with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. So, would you say that the people of India have become more interested in saving tigers over the years?
Absolutely. Rob, the tiger is it's an enigmatic, magnificent animal. You look at that face, and it has forward-facing eyes that that look straight into your eyes, and people have always been enamored by this animal. And over the years, definitely awareness levels have increased tremendously. And one interesting thing that I've seen is that, especially over the last 20 years, we have seen tremendous amounts of increase in tiger tourism and wildlife tourism across India's tiger reserves. And anybody who visits India on safari will notice that the vast majority of people visiting our reserves are Indian citizens. And this shows a tremendous interest of society at large in wildlife and wildlife conservation. And, tigers are, uh, anything to do with tigers immediately garners huge public attention. Uh, they're always in the headlines, they're always in the news, and politicians are very, very careful when they talk about tigers and wildlife, because if they are perceived to say anything negative, that immediately will show in votes. So yes, I would definitely say that there is tremendous citizen involvement in tiger conservation in India.
Thank you for addressing that. So is there enough prey animals available for tigers to increase in numbers?
See, tigers require a lot of prey. A tiger, through the course of a year, and I'm talking about a non-breeding regular Joe tiger, okay? I'm not talking about a mother raising cubs. A tiger will require about 50 deer-sized animals a year to subsist upon. And to sustain that sort of an offtake, we need to have a foundation population of at least 500 deer, which can, again, breed back and make up for that loss. So to sustain one tiger, you basically need 500 deer. And if you are talking about a tigress who's breeding and raising cubs, especially large litters of cubs, she needs to kill almost every day or every other day, while a regular tiger needs to kill about once a week. So for a breeding tiger population, you need a tremendous amount of prey. And that is the key to tiger populations everywhere. Now, what we have seen is that in our better managed landscapes, in our better managed tiger reserves, there is, of course, plenty of prey. But there are areas like Eastern Central India, like Northeastern India, where indigenous people have traditionally hunted bushmeat quite a bit. And even now, a lot of that goes on, not so much for subsistence or for protein, but just as a sport and also commercially. So we have seen that in areas where bushmeat poaching is high, where deer and wild pig populations have been eliminated, we have what are called as silent forests. You might have beautiful top quality habitat, but there are no deer, there are no wild pigs, and there are no tigers. Tiger populations collapse immediately when prey base is hunted out. And to answer that question more specifically, yes, we do have plenty of prey in certain areas, but then there are certain areas which we are trying to recover, which we are trying to bring back, where prey base is low, and that is being addressed on priority.
Great, thank you. What about genetic diversity? Is that an issue in the reserves?
Well, in landscapes like the Central India tiger landscape, you we have seen very high genetic diversity. That's because this landscape alone has multiple tiger reserves, and as I said, a third of India's tigers. And despite it being a fairly fragmented landscape, there is a lot of intermingling and moving of tigers between reserves and even through populated regions, through fields, through farms. And tiger diversity, genetic diversity in that landscape at least, is fairly good. But there are reserves even within that landscape, like the Ranthambore Tiger Reserve, which is quite isolated, where it is a concern. The genetic diversity is a concern. There's a reserve called Simlipal in my state, which has become isolated from all other tiger populations around it for about 40 years now, if not more. And what we've been seeing in Simlipal is that we have the world's only melanistic tigers there. So you see, there was a freak, must have been a freak morph of a tiger cub born there, which carried this gene for melanism, which makes their stripes appear to merge together and makes the tigers look almost black, somewhat like a king cheetah. Uh, and earlier melanism was a one-off thing in that population. You occasionally used to see one tiger that was melanistic. Now about 50% of the tiger population is melanistic. So clearly indicating that there is tremendous inbreeding, and that needs to be addressed through translocation of tigers from other populations into that population to save the genetic diversity in that population. So yes, by and large, I would say genetic diversity is not something we're too worried about, but in individual populations, it is a concern. And it is only a concern that can really be addressed long term if we manage to secure tiger landscapes, if we manage to keep corridors between tiger populations functional, which will lead to tigers naturally dispersing across landscapes and genes sort of free flowing through them.
So, how has the pandemic affected the tiger population? Has there been positive or negative growth since the pandemic?
The figures that we have, including the pandemic period, that is between 2018 and 2022, we have seen growth. Growth has been consistent over the past many years now. I personally think the pandemic did not play a very significant role in tiger population or any other wildlife population for that matter. Yes, with a lot of people returning home to their villages in these tiger landscapes and other wildlife landscapes from the cities and other places where they used to work at, it was noticed that there was a lot of increase in bushmeat poaching. We did find that the poaching of animals like leopards for their skin did increase, because one would presume that a lot of people were out of work and they were looking for ways to make quick money while they were sitting at home doing nothing through the pandemic period. But I do not think that it has in any significant way dented the tiger population as such.
Are zoos able to breed more tigers?
Well, zoos are very successful in breeding tigers. Tigers are cats. They breed like cats under the right circumstances. If you provide a secure environment, plenty of food, they just breed like cats. But then the question arises, what do we do with these zoo tigers? Do they play any real role in conservation? Not so far. We have rewilded orphaned tiger cubs from the wild. Hand-reared cubs from the wild have been successfully rewilded in a few cases. But there has been no effort, no attempt, nor any desire so far to rewild tigers born in zoos. Zoo tigers are, from a conservation point of view, of almost, they're of very little use. They're of almost no use. Besides, zoo tigers also carry many generations of captivity. Who knows what kind of genes they have? Who knows what kind of diseases they might carry? And all in all, it's not a very good idea to take tigers from zoos and rewild them in the wild. Besides, there is a lot more effective way to help tiger populations increase in the wild, and that is simply by providing them sufficient protection and sufficient prey, and they just do the rest by themselves. They are really good at increasing their populations.
Do you think artificial intelligence could be used to help identify tigers and help speed up the process of documenting them?
Absolutely. I mean, uh, we're almost, I explained how the software compares tiger pictures from trap cameras and decides one tiger from another. I'm not a tech expert, but that almost sounds like artificial intelligence to me. But definitely with the pace at which AI is growing, the scale at which it is growing, and almost taking over our lives now. It's I don't think it's too far away that we start using it extensively in wildlife science and wildlife biology and in these kind of statistical surveys. I think we could even be using it a lot in things like protection and security and monitoring of our parks.
Interesting. Thank you. So let me ask you this. When you go on your Nat Hab trips, do you run into the same families of tigers, or do you recognize tigers from previous trips?
Regularly, on a regular basis. One of the great perks of being a safari guide in India's tiger landscapes, or for that matter, I'm sure my friends in South Africa and Kenya and Botswana have the same to say about their landscapes, is that you really get to live with these animals over their lives. Really, I mean, it's amazing to go and see a breeding tigress and to know that I have seen her as a cub with her mother, and I can now claim to have seen tigers individually, seen and known tigers, and observed them over their lives for 3 or 4 generations now. So yes, we do see individual animals. We do recognize them as individuals from their faces, from their facial markings, from the areas they live in, and we do indeed get to follow their lives as individuals over years.
Wow, that's pretty exciting. Well, unfortunately, that's going to be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'm going to throw it back to you for some closing comments.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this. And for those of you who had been missing my conservation webinars because I've been doing a lot of photography ones before this, I hope you enjoyed this. I thought a webinar on this topic was an absolute must-do on the Golden Jubilee of Project Tiger. I look forward to seeing you all soon again, and I have a few more trips to finish before my next webinar. Enjoy yourselves. Have a good day. Thank you.
Aditya, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I would also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. If you're interested in information on how you can travel with Nat Hab, give us a call at the number on your screen, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us Monday for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.